Imagine living in a time when the king and queen of your country had turned against God. They had introduced a new religion, with a fake god named Baal, and encouraged everyone to worship him instead of the one true God. This was the world Elijah lived in. He was a prophet, which means he was someone who spoke on behalf of God. And Elijah had a very important message to share with the king and queen. One day, Elijah stood before King Ahab and declared, "As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years except at my word." 1 Kings 17 verse 1. King Ahab was furious. He saw Elijah as a threat to his power and his new religion. So, he tried to kill Elijah. But Elijah was not afraid. He trusted in God's protection and fled to a hidden valley, where God provided for him through ravens that brought him bread and meat. As time passed, the drought Elijah had predicted became worse and worse. The crops began to wither and die, and the people of Israel started to suffer. King Ahab was desperate to find a solution, but he refused to turn back to God. Meanwhile, Elijah was instructed by God to visit a widow who lived in the city of Zarephath. When Elijah arrived, he found the widow gathering sticks to make a fire. She was very poor and had only a little flour and oil left. Elijah asked her for some food, and the widow shared what little she had. Elijah then prayed to God, asking him to provide for the widow and her son. And God did. He miraculously multiplied the widow's flour and oil, ensuring that she and her son had enough to eat throughout the drought. But Elijah's greatest challenge was yet to come. He was instructed by God to confront the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. This was a bold move, as there were 450 prophets of Baal, and they were determined to prove that their God was more powerful than the God of Israel. The contest began, with the prophets of Baal calling out to their God to send fire to burn their sacrifice. They danced and sang, trying to get their God's attention. But no matter how hard they prayed, nothing happened. Elijah, on the other hand, prayed to the God of Israel, saying, "Let it be known today that you are God in Israel and that I am your servant. I have done all this at your word. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again." 1 Kings 18 verses 36 to 37. And then, in an instant, fire came down from heaven, consuming the sacrifice and the altar. The people who witnessed this miraculous event were amazed. They declared, "The Lord, He is God!" 1 Kings 18 verse 39. Elijah, with the authority of God, then ordered the execution of the prophets of Baal. This was a bold move, but it was necessary to purify the land of Israel and to restore the worship of the one true God. But Elijah's work was far from over. He still had to deal with the wrath of Queen Jezebel, who was determined to kill him. Elijah fled to the desert, where he felt alone and abandoned by God. He prayed to God, saying, "I have had enough, Lord. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." 1 Kings 19 verse 4. But God was not far away. He appeared to Elijah in a gentle whisper, reminding him that he was always present, even in the midst of turmoil and chaos. God said to Elijah, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" 1 Kings 19 verse 9. Elijah explained how he was feeling alone and abandoned, and how he was being pursued by Queen Jezebel. God listened to Elijah's concerns and then said, "Go back the way you came, and go to the desert of Damascus. When you get there, anoint Hazael king over Aram. Also, anoint Jehu son of Nimshi king over Israel, and anoint Elisha son of Shaphat from Abel-Meholah to succeed you as prophet." 1 Kings 19 verses 15 to 16. Elijah obeyed God's instructions and anointed the new kings and his successor, Elisha. He found Elisha plowing a field with 12 pairs of oxen. He threw his mantle over Elisha, symbolizing the transfer of his prophetic authority. Elisha immediately left his oxen and followed Elijah, becoming his servant and disciple. Elijah then continued to minister as a prophet, speaking God's words to the people of Israel. Elijah's final days were spent mentoring Elisha. He taught him everything he knew, and he passed on his prophetic authority to him. And then, in a dramatic and miraculous event, Elijah was taken up into heaven in a whirlwind, and as he rose into the air, his mantle fell to the ground. Elisha watched in amazement as his mentor disappeared into the sky. Elisha picked up the mantle and cried out, "My father! My father! The chariots of Israel and its horsemen!" 2 Kings 2 verse 12. And with that Elijah was gone, taken up into heaven in a whirlwind. Elisha, now the new prophet of God, returned to the Jordan River and struck it with Elijah's mantle. The water parted, and Elisha crossed over, symbolizing the beginning of his new ministry. Elijah's legacy lived on through Elisha, who continued to minister as a prophet in Israel. Elisha performed many miracles and wonders, and he was remembered as one of the greatest prophets in Israel's history. But Elijah's impact went far beyond his own lifetime. He was a symbol of courage and faith in a time of great darkness and spiritual decay. He stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult and unpopular. And he trusted in God's sovereignty, even when the world around him seemed to be falling apart. Elijah's story teaches us many valuable lessons. It reminds us that God is always present, even in the midst of turmoil and chaos. It encourages us to stand up for what is right, even if it means facing opposition and adversity. And it inspires us to trust in God's sovereignty, even when the world around us seems to be falling apart. Elijah's story also reminds us of the importance of faith and obedience. Elijah's faith was unwavering, and he obeyed God's instructions even when they seemed impossible or unreasonable. His faith and obedience were rewarded, as he saw God's power and glory manifested in his life. In conclusion, Elijah's story is a powerful reminder of God's presence, power, and glory. It encourages us to stand up for what is right, to trust in God's sovereignty, and to obey His instructions. May Elijah's story inspire and challenge us to live a life of faith, courage, and obedience. Here are some key lessons from Elijah's story. 1. God is always present. Elijah's story reminds us that God is always present, even in the midst of turmoil and chaos. 2. Stand up for what is right. Elijah stood up for what was right, even when it was difficult and unpopular. 3. Trust in God's sovereignty. Elijah trusted in God's sovereignty, even when the world around him seemed to be falling apart. 4. Faith and obedience are essential. Elijah's faith and obedience were unwavering, and he saw God's power and glory manifested in his life. 5. God's power is greater than any challenge. Elijah's story reminds us that God's power is greater than any challenge we may face. Share with us what you learned from this story. God bless you.